95% of people think they understand the space race. They know Apollo 11. They know Sputnik. They know we beat the Soviets to the moon. They're standing on the tip of the iceberg. Below the surface is where the astronauts were erased from photographs. Below that is where the rockets exploded, and no one was allowed to say so. And at the very bottom, Tier 10, is the conspiracy that isn't history. It's happening right now, and the legal documents are public. We're going all the way down.
Before we descend, a rule. This is not a conspiracy theory channel. Every tier of this iceberg is sourced from government records, declassified Soviet archives, NASA documents, or testimony from engineers who were there and were ordered to say nothing. The conspiracy isn't that the space race was faked. The conspiracy is that the reality was far darker than the fiction, and both sides had every reason to make sure you never found out. Tier 1 is the surface, what they taught you in school. By Tier 10, you'll understand why no one teaches the rest. Let's begin. Here's the story most people know. 1957, the Soviets launched Sputnik, a metal ball 23 inches wide, beeping from low Earth orbit. America panics. Congress panics. A space race begins. 1961, Yuri Gagarin becomes the first human in space. The Soviet Union celebrates. America scrambles. 1969, Neil Armstrong steps onto the moon. The United States wins. The space race ends. It's a clean story. Two superpowers, a technological competition, a winner. Science advancing the human race. That's Tier 1. It's not wrong. It's just missing everything that actually happened. Because the space race wasn't driven by scientific curiosity. It was driven by fear. And fear, as any propagandist will tell you, is far more useful than the truth. We're going deeper. The Soviet Union had a standing rule. No launch was ever announced before it happened. Not to the press, not to the public, not even to most of the Soviet government. If the rocket succeeded, Soviet state media would announce a triumphant achievement. If the rocket failed, and rockets failed constantly in the late 1950s, it simply never happened. The launch was erased. The engineers were quietly transferred. The records were sealed. The result was a distorted mirror. Every Soviet first you heard about, Sputnik, Gagarin, the first woman in space, the first spacewalk, was real. But it was the survivor of a selection process the public never saw. The failures were invisible. NASA understood this asymmetry completely and exploited it.
We're probably so bound up in red tape we can't move.
Right, we need to streamline, expedite.
Right.
Every American failure was filmed and broadcast live.
It is time for everyone to meet an ICBM.
Too clearly.
The Vanguard explosion. The early Atlas crashes. The Redstone that rose 4 inches, fell back, and sat on the pad hissing for an hour before engineers could approach it. These weren't accidents. These were the price of transparency. And strategically, they were useful. Each public American failure kept Congress terrified. Each terrified Congress approved a larger NASA budget. Both sides were engineering the narrative. The space race was, from its first day, at least 50% theater. Still near the surface. Go deeper. Here is a question most people don't ask. What did NASA actually know about Soviet capabilities? The answer, by 1961, was nearly everything. The CIA's Corona spy satellite program, itself classified until 1995, had been photographing Soviet launch facilities since 1960. American analysts knew the true state of Soviet rocket development. They knew the Soviets had failed launches. They knew the N-1 moon rocket program was in trouble. They didn't say so publicly. Because the fear of Soviet space dominance was not just a reaction, it was a managed resource.
In 1961, Kennedy gave his famous "We choose to go to the moon" speech. The Apollo program required $25 billion, the equivalent of over $200 billion today. Getting that money from Congress required a credible threat. A credible threat required a terrifying Soviet program. A terrifying Soviet program required that their failures stay invisible. So both governments, independently, made the same calculation: keep the competition as frightening as possible. Both sides kept secrets, but they kept different kinds of secrets. America hid what it knew. The Soviets hid what they did. We're going deeper now. This is where most history books stop. In 1961, the Soviet government published official photographs of the first cosmonaut corps. British researcher Rex Hall later demonstrated that 5 individuals had been removed from a single early group photograph of 16 cosmonauts. The retouching was clumsy, the telltale signs of 1960s darkroom editing visible to anyone who looked closely enough. A hand hanging in mid-air with no body. A wall texture repeated twice in the same frame. A shadow that has no object casting it. These weren't political dissidents. They were cosmonauts, people who had failed psychological screening or been grounded by injury or simply been deemed unpresentable. The Soviet space program required perfection. Not actual perfection, the appearance of perfection. And the appearance of perfection required that certain people not exist. Most of the erasures were bureaucratic. A cosmonaut who washed out, a candidate who had a breakdown under isolation testing. But one removal was different. One removal happened because the person had died, and the Soviet Union could not let the world know that their greatest triumph had been preceded by a death. That story is Tier 5, going deeper.
March 23, 1961, 20 days before Yuri Gagarin became the first human in space. Valentin Bondarenko was 24 years old, the youngest member of the Soviet Cosmonaut Corps, selected from hundreds of candidates in 1960. By every account, he was well-liked, mild-mannered, he played table tennis well, he had a good singing voice. He was on day 10 of a 15-day endurance experiment inside a low-pressure, oxygen-enriched altitude chamber at the Institute of Biomedical Problems in Moscow. The experiment was routine. He had done this before. At the end of his day's tests, Bondarenko removed the biosensor pads from his skin and wiped away the adhesive residue with a cotton ball soaked in isopropyl alcohol. Then he tossed the cotton ball aside. It landed on the electric hot plate he had been using to brew tea. In a normal atmosphere, the cotton would have smoldered. In an atmosphere enriched with oxygen, the kind that made Soviet spacecraft simpler to pressurize, it detonated into flame. His woolen flight suit caught instantly. He tried to smother the fire with his sleeve. The sleeve caught fire. The attending physician saw it through the porthole and ran to the hatch. He could not open it. The internal pressure held it sealed. Bleeding the pressure through the valves took several minutes. Several minutes during which Valentin Bondarenko burned. When they pulled him out of the chamber, he was still conscious. Third-degree burns covered most of his body. He was reportedly still repeating the same words as they carried him out. It was my fault. No one else is to blame. He died hours later. According to accounts by the attending physician, Yuri Gagarin was at the hospital that night, serving as what Soviet protocol called the Death Watch officer, the official witness. 3 weeks later, Gagarin was in space. The Soviet government classified Bondarenko's death, removed him from every official photograph, and issued orders that his family be provided with everything, as befits the family of a cosmonaut. They were never to say how he died. The story was not made public until 1986, 25 years later, under Gorbachev's glasnost policy. The cover-up didn't just erase Bondarenko. It may have killed 3 Americans. If you're still with me at Tier 5, you're already further than most people go.
The next tiers in this video cover the full lost cosmonaut archive, the Italian radio intercepts, the names the Soviet Union will still not confirm, and the evidence that has never been satisfactorily explained. If you are enjoying the video, please like and subscribe and hit the bell icon. Thank you. Now, back into the deep, because we haven't gotten to the explosions yet. October 24th, 1960. The Baikonur Cosmodrome, Kazakhstan. This is the story they classified for 29 years. An R-16 intercontinental ballistic missile, the most advanced weapon in the Soviet nuclear arsenal, sat on the launch pad, fully fueled with hypergolic propellant, ready for its first test flight. The launch had already been delayed multiple times. Nikita Khrushchev was calling personally for updates. The anniversary of the Bolshevik Revolution was 2 weeks away. A successful launch would be a statement to the world. Marshal Mitrofan Nedelin, Commander-in-Chief of the Soviet Strategic Rocket Forces, was sitting in a field chair approximately 50 meters from the base of the fueled rocket. Around him stood engineers, military officers, launch technicians. Hundreds of people on and around the pad, conducting last-minute checks while the rocket sat loaded. This was a violation of every safety protocol that existed. But Nedelin was under pressure, and pressure in the Soviet system had a way of making safety protocols feel optional. At 6:45 p.m. local time, a faulty electrical circuit sent a premature ignition command to the second stage engine. The second stage ignited while sitting on top of a fully fueled first stage. The propellant tanks ruptured. The hypergolic chemicals, which ignite spontaneously on contact with each other, mixed in the open air. The fireball was instantaneous and total. The Commander-in-Chief of Soviet Strategic Rocket Forces, the most powerful military space official in the world, Marshal Nedelin, did not survive. All that was recovered was a burned gold star medal, one shoulder strap, a wristwatch. The official death toll, established by a state commission in 1994, is 78. Estimates from engineers who survived and later testified range as high as 126. Some accounts suggest the actual number may be higher still, because in the chaos of the first hours, no one with authority had any incentive to count carefully. The Soviet government's response was immediate and total. Complete secrecy was imposed by Khrushchev within hours. Military personnel were buried in a mass grave in the city of Baikonur. Their families were summoned and told the same story. Their husbands, sons, and fathers had died in an air accident. Marshal Nedelin received a prestigious state funeral and burial in the Kremlin Wall necropolis. His official cause of death? A plane crash. The Soviet government did not acknowledge the Nedelin catastrophe until 1989. 29 years. This isn't the deepest tier, where the official narrative begins to crack. Here it is. The Soviet Union had a moon rocket. This is not a theory. It existed. It was 344 feet tall, nearly the same height as the Saturn V. Its first stage contained 30 NK-15 engines, more than any rocket in history. It weighed over 6 million pounds fully fueled. Its name was the N-1. And the Soviet government spent 20 years insisting it had never been built. Here is the N-1's foundational design flaw, and it is almost unbelievable in retrospect. The 30 first-stage engines were never test-fired simultaneously, not once. The Soviet program didn't have a test stand large enough for the full cluster. Individual engines were bench-tested. The combination was trusted to computer modeling and calculation. It was not a combination that held. The N-1 flew 4 times between 1969 and 1972. All 4 flights ended in catastrophic failure. But it is the second launch, July 3rd, 1969, that no one who saw it ever forgot. 13 days before Apollo 11 would land on the moon,
The N-1 lifted off. It climbed approximately 200 meters. Then a single loose bolt was sucked into one of the 30 oxygen pumps. One engine failed. The automated safety system, detecting the anomaly, began shutting down additional engines. The rocket lost thrust symmetry. It tilted. It fell directly onto the launch pad it had just left. The explosion released energy equivalent to approximately 7 kilotons of TNT. An eyewitness, Lieutenant Colonel Semen Komarovsky, later said, "Today I saw, without exaggeration, the end of the world." The launch pad was obliterated. It took 18 months to rebuild.
American spy satellites photographed the crater. That photograph, analyzed at Langley in the weeks following the explosion, was the first hard confirmation that the Soviet Union had been running a full moon program they publicly denied. The CIA knew, NASA leadership knew, and still, publicly, both governments maintained the fiction. The Soviets were never in the moon race.
The N-1 program was canceled in 1974. The remaining hardware, multiple full rockets worth years of engineering effort, was bulldozed and buried in the Kazakh steppe. The program was not publicly acknowledged by the Russian government until after the Soviet collapse. 20 years, buried in the ground, as if it had never existed. We're now below 500 meters. 3 tiers left. This is where it gets strange. In 1957, the same year Sputnik launched, 2 brothers in Turin, Italy, built a listening station in a place they called Torre Bert. Achille and Giovanni Udica Cordelia were amateur radio operators, teenagers, with homemade equipment they had assembled themselves. They pointed their antenna array at the radio frequencies the Soviet Union used for space communications. They connected a reel-to-reel recorder. They started listening. Between 1960 and 1964, they recorded what they claimed were Soviet space transmissions that the Soviet government never acknowledged. November 1960, they tuned into a rhythmic beeping, distinct from the usual telemetry, identified as a faint SOS signal in Morse code. What was most alarming? That the signal's frequency was shifting, as if the craft was moving away from Earth and deeper into the void of space. February 1961, signals consistent with a human heartbeat, irregular, slowing, then stopping. The last breaths of a cosmonaut echoing in the silence of space. And then, in a recording the brothers dated to late 1961, a female voice, speaking Russian, barely audible through the static. Soviet authorities dismissed the recordings as misidentifications, atmospheric interference, satellite beacons, test transmissions. Western intelligence agencies investigated and returned inconclusive findings. Here is what we know with certainty. The Soviet cosmonaut selection program began in 1960 with an initial group of candidates. The documented record of Soviet space missions accounts for most, but not all, of those candidates. The Soviet secrecy was so total, so systematically enforced across decades, that the complete picture has never been independently verified. Was Gagarin truly the first human in space? Almost certainly yes. But almost certainly is not the same as provably. And the Soviet Union, through 29 years of classified disasters, airbrushed photographs, and sealed archives, made certain that proof would never be available. The Judica Cordelia recordings have never been definitively authenticated. They have also never been definitively explained. In 2026, we still don't have the full list. You might think by now that you have the full picture of Cold War space deception. You don't. From here, the records become much harder to ignore. May 15th, 1987, Baikonur Cosmodrome. The Soviets were preparing to launch the most powerful rocket they had ever built, the Energia. The payload was officially described as carrying geophysical experiments. The payload was the Polyus, also known internally as Skiff-DM, the prototype of a Soviet orbital laser battle station. 187 feet long, 80 metric tons, built around a repurposed Mir space station core. Armed with a 1 megawatt carbon dioxide laser designed specifically to destroy the SDI satellites Reagan had announced in 1983, the Star Wars defense system. The Soviets had been authorized to build it in a Kremlin decree following Reagan's 1983 announcement.
Later tonight, in that speech from the Oval Office, I plan to concentrate on the Soviet military threat and the U.S. defense program. Defense modernization program and the need to sustain a substantial defense effort despite the economic costs that it contains. I hope that we can set this nation and the world on a new course for peace.
The crash program ransacked the Soviet space industry for parts. Engineers replaced the full laser module, which wasn't ready, with a boilerplate dummy. A lower-power targeting laser remained aboard to test the fire control system in orbit. The Soviets painted two names on its black fuselage in white letters, Polyus, and beneath it, Mir 2. Mir means peace. They named their orbital laser weapon Peace.
Our objective is a world of lasting peace, that both sides have sufficient nuclear capability to inflict unacceptable damage on the other. In other words, there would be no winners. I'd like to think this could be the beginning of a modern crusade for peace.
Mikhail Gorbachev, who had reportedly been kept partially uninformed about the weapon's full capabilities, insisted on being present at the launch site personally. The Energia performed perfectly. Polyus separated cleanly. Its engines fired to boost into final orbit. And then, the attitude control computer made an error. The rotation command was issued. The spacecraft was supposed to rotate 180 degrees and stop. Instead, it rotated 360 degrees, a full circle, and fired its engines, pointing in exactly the wrong direction. Polyus, the only orbital laser battle station ever built, fell into the Pacific Ocean. The Soviet government described the launch as a successful test of the Energia booster, which was true. The payload, it said, was a technology demonstrator, which was technically accurate, if misleading. No mention of a laser, no mention of a weapon, no mention that a space-age arms race had been decided in that moment by a software bug. The full story was not confirmed publicly until Soviet archives were partially opened after 1991. The Soviets called their orbital laser a geophysical experiment. China calls its classified payloads technology demonstration satellites. Same language, same opacity. Better hardware, far more launches. Here is the conspiracy that is not a theory. It's a policy framework with legal language and 68 signatures. This is the one they didn't need to classify because they wrote it into the legal documents.
The Moon's south pole contains an estimated 600 million metric tons of water ice locked in permanently shadowed craters. That water can be electrolyzed into hydrogen and oxygen, liquid rocket fuel. In practical terms, it is a refueling depot at the edge of the inner solar system. Whoever controls it controls the economics of every mission that goes further. But water isn't the most valuable resource up there. The lunar regolith has been absorbing helium-3, a byproduct of solar wind, for approximately 4 billion years. It doesn't exist in useful quantities on Earth. It is theoretically the perfect fuel for fusion reactors, the energy technology every major nation on Earth is actively pursuing. 1 metric ton of helium-3 in a working fusion reactor could power a city of 1 million people for a year. The Moon contains an estimated 1 million metric tons. In 2020, the United States introduced the Artemis Accords, a framework for the behavior of nations on and around the Moon. It has been signed by 68 nations. Not signed? China. Not signed? Russia. The Artemis Accords establish, among other provisions, the concept of safety zones, areas surrounding lunar operations that other nations are expected not to enter or interfere with. The legal language stops carefully short of claiming sovereignty over territory, which the 1967 Outer Space Treaty forbids. But safety zones around resource extraction operations are, in practice, functionally indistinguishable from territorial claims. They just use different words. China and Russia have responded with their own framework, the International Lunar Research Station, the ILRS, with invited participation from nations the United States has sanctioned, pressured, or otherwise alienated. As of 2026, the ILRS coalition has attracted multiple partners across Asia, the Middle East, and Africa. 2 competing legal architectures, 2 coalitions, 1 moon. No international body with the authority or the enforcement mechanism to adjudicate between them. In 2025, China conducted 93 orbital launches, a new national record. Within that manifest, classified Yaogan reconnaissance payloads, dual-use satellite constellations, reusable rocket development, and the first hardware tests for a crewed lunar landing system that China has publicly committed to completing before 2030. The United States, under the Artemis program, has a crewed lunar return target of no earlier than 2026, repeatedly delayed. Here is the tier that changes everything. The first space race was about ideology. Capitalism against communism projected into the sky. It was propaganda. Both sides hid their failures. Both sides built weapons in orbit. Both sides used the vocabulary of exploration to conduct geopolitical competition. But the prize was always symbolic. A flag, a footprint, a headline. The second space race is about resources worth trillions of dollars, conducted by nations with hypersonic missiles, orbital jamming platforms, anti-satellite weapons demonstrated at altitude, and no agreed framework for what happens when 2 competing outposts try to operate in the same lunar crater. There is no Outer Space Treaty equivalent covering resource rights, and there is no agreed answer to the question that the next 10 years will force the world to confront. If China lands at the South Pole first and establishes a permanent base with a safety zone covering the water ice deposits, what does anyone do about it? That is not a conspiracy theory. That is the question sitting at the bottom of the iceberg. If this video gave you something, hit like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.